A driving license gives you permission to drive. A passport is something you use to travel, but you don't have to have those things. The difference with a digital ID is, and Keir Starmer has said that it will be mandatory, and by using your facial biometric, the government will be able to access.
What is the best argument for digital ID?
Well, it's definitely not about immigration. Reality of the impact of digital ID schemes around the world is never really spoken about. The Aadhaar scheme in India has led to numerous deaths.
Can you tie this together with CBDCs?
The reason that some governments have taken an interest in CBDCs is for things like automating taxes, but also that you can make the digital currency programmable. The government can force banks to monitor all of their customers. People have been cut off from financial services as well.
What's the latest with facial recognition from the police?
Police have persisted and really trained algorithms on the general public over time to the point where it is quite accurate now. Do we want to live in a total policing environment like that where we're constantly being scanned and watched? They're treating the British public like we're idiots and trying to force an extraordinary surveillance system on us on the premise of a lie.
How exactly is this defeated?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say
Silkie, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for coming in. Of course, you're a director of Big Brother Watch and have been very vocal, not only on facial recognition, on CBDCs, but about digital IDs. Sir Keir Starmer, our Prime Minister, has announced the Brit card, which he intends to bring out in force from 2026. We're going to look at what exactly digital ID is, what exactly the arguments are for and against it, who's funding it, who's behind it. I'm intent that this conversation will be a pretty spectrum full look at this new proposal and digital ID itself. Before we get into it, what exactly is digital ID? Why is it different from, let's say, your passport that has biometric data? Why is it different from when we log on to our computers and we sign into various applications, we have to use our fingerprints? Why is it different to, let's say, our driving license? Why is it different to our voter registration? What is different about digital ID to the IDs that we already have?
Well, a lot of those types of documents that you refer to that can be used as IDs are actually permits to do other things. So, for example, a driving license gives you permission to drive. A passport is something you use to for travel, but you don't have to have those things. The difference with a digital ID is that it exists solely to identify you and to hold information about you with the government. And Keir Starmer has said that it will be mandatory, so every single person in the country will have to have one. The other serious difference with this is that immediately this mandatory digital ID has been paired with serious restrictions on our liberty, which might give people a flavour of what's to come. So if you don't have Starmer's digital ID, you won't be able to work. And so naturally, the next questions that we ask are, what else won't you be able to do unless you have a digital ID? Why is it being introduced? And how much data will eventually be stored about each and every one of us attached to this digital ID? The fact is that already, to the extent that the government has said anything about the substance, it will be biometric. So it will be attached to your face, which is then becomes like your barcode, really. And by using your facial biometric, the government will be able to access a record on you. At the moment, they're talking about right to work checks and about basic information about individuals. But it seems very, very likely indeed that that will grow and grow probably into a sprawling surveillance system. And already various ministers have spoken about the different departments that will use this card, the different types of data they want to store in it, the way they want to use it for automated fraud checks, and for other kinds of permissions and prohibitions. So this has the potential to be a very, very sinister, expansive surveillance system.
Right. So there are digital IDs across the world, not just in totalitarian authoritarian nations like China, but in countries that we might consider the free world: Germany, Argentina, Belgium. Denmark, Estonia, and countries like Italy, Japan, Nigeria, Pakistan, Peru, Singapore. I'm not sure they're technically the free world, but they have their Sing Pass. And these are, by the way, the list goes on. In all of these countries have used it for various regions, including some of the things that you've mentioned already, but welfare, housing, voting, banking, tax filing, healthcare, public services, travel, employment, disaster response. There's a whole slew of reasons why people have brought in digital ID. What is the best argument for digital ID? Starmer said it's to clamp down on immigration. The Labour Together report that posited this was pushed by Jake Richards, MP for Rother Valley, and Adam Jogi, MP for Newcastle-under-Lyme. They have said it's about immigration. What is the best argument that digital IDs would be a good thing for Britain?
Well, it's definitely not about immigration. We can talk about that, but it's definitely the Brit card, as it's called. It will have absolutely no impact on small boat crossings, at least anyway. I guess the best argument for a digital ID system is if you are somebody that likes a big state and you see the role of government as not serving the public, but managing, potentially even controlling the public, wanting to know where everyone is all the time, wanting to be able to issue permissions and revoke them, then a digital ID is really the perfect tool of control in a scenario like that. And I think there are governments around the world that have them for that reason, basically for population management, and that have used them with varying degrees of positive and negative impact on populations. But one thing that really does bug me is that the reality of the impact of digital ID schemes around the world is never really spoken about. It's spoken about like, we get accused of behaving like digital ID is some kind of dystopian sci-fi, but really there's a lot of sci-fi in the descriptions of digital ID as being this magnificent positive thing around the world. If you look, for example, in the government's press release on digital ID, they reference the digital ID scheme in India. I mean, that's absolutely insane. The Aadhaar scheme in India has led to numerous deaths, a really serious negative impact.
How death? Why deaths?
Because, for example, when people have been locked out of their biometric identifier, whether it's connectivity issues or access issues, they can't access essentials and food. People who are living in poverty then can't access the things that they need. Likewise here, one of the first secondary uses that's being spoken about is access to welfare. And that would affect a population who, or many of whom already don't have passports, poorer people, older people, they don't have smartphones, they might not have very good internet access, they might not have very good digital skills. People with special educational needs and disabilities who aren't able to navigate systems like this could very easily be locked out.
Let's take a quick look at how the media is reporting on Starmer's decision to introduce mandatory digital IDs in Britain using Ground News. Now, left-leaning Pink News ran the headline. UK government's new digital ID scheme causes concern among trans community. Contrast that with the right-leaning Report 24, who led with British socialists want to introduce digital ID. Millions try to resist. Two very different spins from the left and the right on the same story. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website helped me and my team cut through media bias and get the full picture on any story like this one. There are over 300 articles published on Starmer's decision, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source, context, and key breakdowns. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is essential to cutting through media bias and getting informed the right way. That's why Ground News' blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is such a powerful tool. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, so by supporting my sponsors, you are also supporting this show.
So there's no perfect comparison, of course, between countries like the UK and India, or even the UK and Estonia that's always brought up. Again, Estonia actually has had almost, their population is about 1 million people. They had 760,000 people lose access to their digital ID because of a security flaw. They had over 250,000 people whose photos were compromised because of a security flaw. And
so your India example is not just that they would be locked out by, let's say they've broken the law or they've done something wrong and intentionally.
Yeah,
but there's actually mistakes that happen that would lead to this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a large-scale national technical system. The British government doesn't have a very good track record with IT systems, full stop.
Track and trace comes to mind.
Oh my God, yeah.
What we spent, 29 billion on? Was it
eye-watering?
Yeah. And it didn't work.
Yeah, exactly. And in fact, even, the most direct parallel is the last ID scheme that this country attempted under former Prime Minister Tony Blair, and £5 billion of taxpayers' money was wasted on that, and it never worked.
5 billion?
Yeah, 5 billion.
We'll come back to Tony Blair because this is the origin of this whole issue in Britain. So just on this issue of trying to work out the best case scenario for the best argument for a digital ID. Now, you mentioned immigration. It's worth actually starting with this example. It seems obvious why it's not going to work on immigration. Firstly, the illegal immigrants who are coming here over the channel, Border Control is literally picking them up in the channel, bringing them to shore, and then busing them to hotels. So they've been registered. We know exactly who they are, where they are, and there's nothing been done about it. It's not like they're being deported. Well, it's okay. Very small numbers are being deported. Not only that, we saw through the Deliveroo scandal that those who want to work here illegally can find illegal identification. There were black market vendors of Deliveroo passes so that there could be this illegal workers could, I suppose the same thing was probably being done with Uber Eats as well, these kind of services. So there is a black market that emerges. If you create a digital ID, there's a black market that comes about to get around it. I don't see how that wouldn't happen with digital ID. Presumably in these other countries, something similar has happened.
Because it would happen. I mean, exactly. I mean, people point to European countries that have digital IDs, and all of those European countries have very similar issues with immigration and illegal working. And even quite aside from the kind of app economy, people can work for cash in hand in kebab shops and barbers and, news agents and all the places that have come up in these investigations as employing people for cash in hand without identification. Already in the UK, there is a legal duty on every employer to do a right to work check. So you're supposed to show national insurance number or British passport to an employer before you can legally work. So people employers who are already not doing that are not going to suddenly decide to do it because the government's introduced a digital ID. It's for the birds. And I think every minister that's been sent out to try and defend this has only been able to respond by saying, well, it's not a silver bullet. So basically, they're admitting it just doesn't work.
That's actually the term they use in the Labour Together report, that it's not a silver bullet.
Yeah, well, I think, the reality is they're treating the British public like we're idiots and trying to force an extraordinary surveillance system on us on the premise of a lie. And I think people have woken up and realised that because it does defy common sense. This has absolutely nothing to do with stopping the boats, smashing the gangs or anything else. It has absolutely nothing to do with illegal working. But what it will do is affect the way that all of us live our lives and open up the beginnings of what could be a very, very expansive surveillance system affecting the whole population.
Yeah. So, and speaking now in the aftermath of the horrendous killings at the Manchester synagogue by a man now called Jihad al-Shami, here's an example of, he would presumably, we've got a counter-terrorist unit, counter-terrorist organisations that are working to fight crime, but these crimes still happen. Now, there's a lot of them that are foiled, but this would be another sort of, I guess they might try and argue that digital ID will help with safety. And if you look at how Tony Blair's attempt to bring in ID, it wasn't digital ID that Tony Blair tried to bring in as early as 2002, and then 2005 was when it got quashed. But that was in the aftermath of 9/11. 2005, it was after the 7/7 bombing. Despite having these great safety measures already, and I think this applies to immigration. It's actually the will. It's the will to deport people, the will to actually clamp down at this. This doesn't actually deal with the issue to me. It seems like that to me.
We've been different governments have tried to sell ID, biometric ID, as it was under Blair, digital ID now as it is under Starmer, for any number of reasons. Before 9/11, the argument for a mandatory national ID was about cracking down on welfare fraud. There were arguments made about antisocial behaviour. And then, of course, after 9/11, it was, we couldn't possibly fight terrorism unless these terrorists had digital ID. It's so ridiculous. And now, because there is a serious concerns in the public and mounting concerns about immigration and illegal working, that has just been used again and exploited as a pretext to try to recycle the same policy idea. I'd never bought that a mandatory ID system would have anything to do with countering terrorism, and I don't think that argument was ever made.
It wasn't made.
Sorry, I don't think the argument was ever successfully made.
Okay.
Because of course, in 2010 the scheme was scrapped, and it just defied common sense. It's quite clear that really a digital ID is about the people it affects most is the general law-abiding population. Somebody that doesn't want to have a digital ID, an ID card, or a genuine real ID just simply won't have one.
Yeah. Well, it's also what we don't see on the horizon. And again, that would be in the realm of the speculative. But as we saw with COVID, the desire, not just of the government, but a decent part of the British population are pretty authoritarian by nature. And you saw this with the vast numbers who were reporting on their neighbours for breaking lockdown rules. So there's a concern that this gets into the wrong hands and actually all sorts of hell is awaiting us.
Yeah.
So it's worth going back to the ideology. You make the case that, as you've just there, that it's about sort of surveillance. But it's worth picking that apart a little bit and understanding why it is that surveillance of safetyism, where that comes from. And I guess it seems like it's part of the Tony Blair globalist world, technocratic worldview. But is there anything more to why is it that they so believe in surveillance? Is it already what you've sort of explained, or is there something more to it?
Technocratic is the perfect word for this. And it's Starmerism all over. It's bureaucracy, it's Blairism, it's that kind of technocratic control of a population. And I don't mean to say that and to sound so like woo-woo about that. But it's simply you just have to look at the way that they describe that it could be used to see that really that is what it's about. I think there's something here that there is, of course, an appetite for safetyism. And I think among the portion of the public that doesn't really care about this, it's, broadly, which although I think that's changing, I think it's broadly people that think it just might never affect them. They just might never rub up against the hard edge of this kind of a system. But the purpose of the surveillance, the purpose of the collecting the records is for control. The digital ID is basically a license. It's basically a permit. We see that already with it starting with right to work checks. So you have to have a digital ID to identify you in order that you can do something that you otherwise can just lawfully do. That will bleed into other areas. So the next one, I guarantee, in fact, I'd put money on it, would be that you'll need to have a digital ID check in order to rent somewhere to live, because already there are legal requirements on landlords to do these right to rent checks as well. But at the moment, you can use a passport. Under Starmer, a British passport is no longer good enough documentation to do these basic things like live, rent, work. And so it's the establishment of a permit system. And then if we do look at what happened during COVID, the permission became predicated on whether you were vaccinated or not. Then it was whether you had 2. Then it was whether you had 3. And so you can see how something that's a digital identifier that holds information about you suddenly becomes used to manage your access to public life and control the decisions that you make. For example, like during COVID, when they were basically used, COVID passes, mandatory COVID passes were used to coerce people into getting double vaccinated. And that's just the beginning. I mean, they're also talking about the multiple areas of life: education, tax, childcare.
What are they saying about education?
So no details, but that this is something that will be used in education. I mean, then again, it's for people to speculate. But if you were to roll back 3 or 4 years, you'd be thinking about potentially vaccine requirements to go to university and go to school, because those were the kinds of things that were being briefed out by ministers at the time, whether they happened or not, they were being seriously consulted on. Then the next step, once the digital ID bleeds into these areas, is that you blend the information. Because the argument will be, well, hang on, if you need the digital ID to work, isn't it right that we check your benefit status? Let's do a check with DWP and find out about your benefits and your dependents and everything else. And then we could check your bank as well, because the Starmer's government has just introduced mass bank spying powers on the premise of dealing with welfare fraud, which is an extraordinary change in our system of law. Yes, yeah, that's passing into law.
So what new powers do they have?
So under it's called the Public Authorities Fraud, Error and Recovery Bill, the government can force banks to monitor all of their customers, so whether you're receiving benefits or not, to monitor all of their customers to try to find people that are connected to benefits payments, and then analyse their accounts to see if there are any potential eligibility issues, or if they travelled too much this year, is there too much in the account, which is an absolute nightmare and destined for mistakes, because it's a very, very complex system, and you just can't automate that kind of surveillance. But of course, again, it's inevitable that it will bleed, and it will, the argument will be, if you're doing that for benefits claimants, can we do that for tax? Why aren't you doing it for tax? Can we automate everyone's tax? And so if a digital ID starts to be used for right to work, they're already talking about benefits. Next will be tax. They're also talking about using the digital ID. When I say they, I mean the UK government, using the digital ID to open a private bank account. So this does go into the private sector as well. And as night follows day, the next step will be to blend that information. And in fact, the impetus will be, why aren't you? It isn't an oversight to not know if you're using this identifier in order to collect benefits. Shouldn't we really, and you're also using it for the bank, shouldn't we be able to see what's going on in the bank and what's going on in the benefits and what's going on at work and what's going on at the school?
And they'll just come back at you with well, what have you got to hide? What are you worried about? It's worth touching on the banking and debanking, because I know this is something that you look at on Big Brother Watch is an important thing, and how it's connected to CBDCs, central bank digital currencies. Let's start with debanking. So the most famous example of this was Nigel Farage was debanked from Coutts, which is a NatWest subsidiary, and this was pretty much a national scandal back in 2024. He did eventually have his accounts reopened, but there's other sort of famous examples, which was Alexandra Tolstoy, who is the progeny of Leo Tolstoy, the Russian author. Because of her Russian connections, she had her accounts frozen, and this is at the beginning of the Ukraine war. So we've seen already in Britain how the banks are working against people, and of course, if you don't have access to your banks, you don't have access to money, you're effectively, it's just you can't do anything. So what have Big Brother found with regards to banking, further than what you've already laid out?
It's really worrying that we have seen these examples of politicised debanking, and in fact, it goes back to the earlier stage of digital banking. If you look at, for example, the closure by PayPal of WikiLeaks account, and so at the behest, almost directly at the behest of governments, people have been cut off from financial services as well. And I think it's a growing concern. In fact, I do know that there are lots of people, even in Parliament who have been affected by really onerous bank intrusion and checks and debanking, and many of who won't want to talk about it because, of course, it's stigmatising, and some of them might have other financial interests or business interests and they don't want to talk about this sort of thing. But I hear from members of Parliament who are similarly affected by debanking, and it's partly because of the rules that we have on what they call politically exposed people, that basically if you're involved in politics in any way, there are it's a whole different category of checks that are conducted on you. In an environment of identity politics and culture wars that we currently have, it does mean that you end up with people who are, fairly mainstream politicians, as Farage is, being affected by debanking, coupled with a digital ID system. I think the risks here are exacerbated significantly, and I do think there's, it's important to acknowledge this is a free speech issue. These kinds of punishments and the withdrawal of services are aimed at limiting what people can say and how they express themselves.
Yeah, quite well. Farage was the reason given, according to internal memos at Coots, was his controversial, quote unquote, controversial views. But can you tell us any more about these MPs that you're referring to, or anyone in Commons who has spoken about this?
I mean, I couldn't out people, and people haven't spoken out. People who have been affected haven't spoken out about it. That much I can definitely say, because it's stigmatising. Because, and I can understand that. I mean, I'm somebody who normally shouts from the rooftops about these kinds of things, but I can understand how, if you've got a family who might have other jobs and business interests and stuff, that to say, yeah, my bankers shut me out, or threaten to shut me out unless I do X, Y, and Z, then that is really stigmatising.
Can you tie this together with CBDCs? And maybe actually just we'll go back to the very core of it. What exactly is a CBDC to someone who's new to this topic?
Yeah, a central bank digital currency is a currency issued by the central bank that is completely digital in nature, and that is typically it would have to be attached to a digital identifier of some type. And so another proposal that has been on the table is for a brick coin, so go with your brick card. So a UK CBDC that would be controlled by the central bank, and with the involvement of government, something held in a digital wallet.
Okay, and I'll ask a similar question to what I did about digital ID. Seeing as so much of our banking now is done on apps and online, what exactly is the difference to someone who's new to this topic? Why would they be more worried about that than the fact that they have to go onto a screen to look at their money in the first place?
I think obviously the central difference is that it's issued by the central bank and can be impacted by the government more directly in a way than private sector banking works, right? So you start to worry about things like, if the government wants to freeze a bank account, if it's digital, it's much easier for them to do, especially if it's a central bank issued currency or account.
But presumably the digital currency would be held in private accounts. So they're not going to set up new accounts, right?
That's not actually necessarily the case. No, this is its own system, its own currency, and so if it can be issued by the central bank, then it can be revoked and frozen as well. And it seems quite likely that, and we've seen in other countries around the world, that the way that kind of a system normally starts is by some kind of government issued payment as well, which makes sense, right? So something like a welfare payment, child benefit, something like this, a pension, could be issued in a digital way.
And why should people be more worried about that than the control central banks have on currency as it exists already? I
think people will have legitimate worries about the extent to which their banks and private banks can monitor their payments as well. But it's very different to the government, the government that has a serious impact on your freedom, and that can revoke payments as well as issue them. And that, again, it has the seeds of potentially a system of very, very sprawling intrusion into your private life. The reason that some governments have taken an interest in CBDCs is for things like automating taxes. And, it involves a level of interference and control in people's lives. But also that you can make the digital currency programmable. So because it's digital in nature, you can put digital conditions on the way that it's used. So, for example, if you're issuing a welfare payment, you could say this currency can only be used in the supermarket on fruit and vegetables. Or people have had concerns about the way that a digital currency might be used to log, record, and then maybe control somebody's carbon impact. Because you could say, you've had too many flights this year. We can see from your digital currency, that's enough for you, and then cut you off from those kinds of payments.
Right, yeah, okay, I see. And that's really not hard to imagine given the ideologies of the Westminster elite.
I mean, there are people, from central banks who have discussed it as akin to giving children pocket money. The good thing about it is you can control what they do with it. And that's the kind of ways that...
Publicly they've said that?
Yes, yeah. It's the kind of way that CBDCs have been spoken about. I can tell you, I can give you a reference. You can clip it.
The money would be programmed to be released only when something happened. You could think, for example, of giving your children pocket money, but programming the money so that it couldn't be used for sweets.
Wow. So another finger on the all gripping hand of this incoming British totalitarianism is facial recognition. You've been following this for some years. The limit to what I vaguely understand about it, as well as Britain has famously got more CCTV cameras than parts of China, but I know that the police do have these roaming vehicles that have kind of cameras attached to every end of them, and they are operating facial recognition in crime prevention.
Mm-hmm.
Is that where is Britain with regards to facial recognition, and how does facial recognition tie into what we've already discussed? Are you turning healthy fruits into highly unhealthy fruits without even realizing it? Fruit can be one of the healthiest things you can put into your body, but the majority of Americans are guilty of making this single mistake that can counteract all of the health benefits of fruit. Some fruits can help with occasional constipation, reduce bloating, and even help burn calories. Others can wreak havoc on your digestive system and energy levels. I came across this viral presentation from world-renowned heart surgeon Dr. Stephen Gundry, which explains everything. I learnt a lot. It has made me rethink my brekkie. I'm going to put a link for you all to watch it because I think this is important information. Go watch it right now at thehealthyfat.com/win. Oh, and by the way, eliminating these specific fruits could forever help increase energy levels, decrease brain fog, support digestion, and even lose weight. Dr. Gundry has lost 70 pounds himself using his research and has kept the weight off for over 20 years and counting. His digestive issues are gone. His health, I am told, is fantastic, and he feels younger and healthier today than he did in his 40s. His video has been watched now by over 20 million people. And you can watch and learn more over at thehealthyfat.com/win. It's linked at the bottom of the video, but he'll teach you exactly how he's kept his weight off for free. Now, back on with the show.
It ties in completely into what we're currently discussing. Under the Starmer government, a new framework is being written for live facial recognition in Britain that will therefore give license basically to police forces to use it around the country. Typically, this has been done, as you described, with cameras on the back of police vans that have been driven around into city centres. But a big development that we now have is that fixed cameras, like normal-looking CCTV cameras, are having live facial recognition software put on them. That's happening right now. That's very, very new. In fact, members of my team went to Croydon just in the past couple of days, where that is now being rolled out. So you wouldn't notice really walking down the street, there's normal CCTV cameras. What you don't know is they're actually doing an identity check on you. They're checking your facial biometrics in the way that would happen if you were going through passport control.
This is like the film Minority Report with Tom Cruise.
It's like
We're living
almost
it.
every dystopian sci-fi film from the past few decades. And then, of course, paired with a digital ID, which operates on your facial biometrics, means that the whole population is enrolled in a facial biometric system, and it just takes a decision of somebody in government or in the police to lock the two together.
As you speak there, I can't help but think of the fact that so many of us, especially those of us who have Apple products, have already given over our facial recognition. We kind of voluntarily said, yeah, sure, you can have my... I accept that you can use face recognition to log into my iPhone. I accept that you can use my fingerprint to log onto my Mac. Are these things connected, or is it just if we've already given all this up naturally, what's the extra difference that this makes?
Well, when you use facial recognition for your phone, if you're somebody that does that, you're only entrusting your facial biometric to the internal software of your phone.
Not to the big tech companies in Silicon Valley?
No, it doesn't go to Apple. And I believe Apple on that one. I mean, it might change over time. And of course, the UK government actually has been trying to build backdoors into Apple software over the past year, which is extraordinary. And there was a big pushback from the Trump administration about that because, of course, they have a global impact. But that is right, that people use their facial biometrics with sometimes just bits of software or tech that are really controlled by them. What I worry about more is when you see that happen in other areas of everyday life where it's not controlled by you, it's controlled by someone else. So really weird use of facial recognition is increasingly in schools for kids to get their school lunch. Like if you have free school meals, or if you use digital payment systems at school, and the schools say, well, it's better than the kids carrying cash or a card because it's safer and everything else. But then these kids are being conditioned to think that it's normal to go through a kind of like home office style, border style check just to get their school lunch. And I think that does that kind of like securitization of everyday life changes the environment in which we live. And it does mean that then people are more conditioned to accept live facial recognition cameras going down the street. I really fear that we'll get to the stage one day where people won't feel safe unless there's live facial recognition cameras on the streets. You know, like the real kind of end point of a dystopian surveillance society. But this has been creeping for some time, and it's really important that people realise, you know, this is not just, again, it's been sold on a lie. You know, they're catching criminals they'd never otherwise catch. I watch the police using live facial recognition. I can tell you now that they are not rounding up dangerous fugitives day in, day out using live facial recognition cameras. They're stopping people that are known to the police, that they want to have a chat to, that they want to keep an eye on, and you know.
What are people, petty criminals?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's often people that like clearly have drug problems or mental health issues, low-hanging fruit, really, who are caught up in the criminal justice system. And that makes sense. I mean, especially the way that they've used it so far with vans and cameras and a big police presence is you would have to walk up to the police and walk up to the camera in order to be caught by it, right? So they're not catching the most dangerous criminals. Of course, that could check when we have...
Right, because they're not like covert police vans. It does say police emblazoned on the front.
Police live facial recognition cameras. So you're basically volunteering yourself to
police. It says
yeah,
police.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
But as I say, that's changing because now they're using these fixed cameras. It is becoming more stealthy and it's becoming more widespread. But and it was always going to go that way. I think it was obvious that it really what was happening before was like a toe in the water and getting people used to the idea that this massive change was happening, which is like the boiling frog, isn't it? I mean, that's why I don't think there's been the kind of outcry that there should be. Nowhere else in the democratic world is live facial recognition used in this way. You won't see live facial recognition cameras like that used in Europe or America or anywhere else. We are a complete outlier. And paired with things like digital ID and kind of crackdowns and protests that we've seen, you know, the worry is that that we all become kind of walking ID cards with facial recognition cameras, that we're all kind of walking barcodes that can be tracked and monitored and then, in different ways managed and controlled by our own government.
What's the latest with facial recognition from the police? I know that there was some sort of pilot schemes. One was in Croydon, I believe. Mm-hmm. And what's the plan next? Is there a plan to roll it out across the country? And do we know how much is being spent on this? What's the return on every pound that's spent by the police on what do we get for our money?
Yeah, I mean, those are all really good questions, which the police typically refuse to answer. And it's really hard to put, not that they're not very forthcoming about the money spent on facial recognition anyway. We do freedom of information requests all the time, so we struggle to get that kind of information. You can, get information on what various police forces spend on the tech and so on, but there's a lot more that goes into it because bear in mind they're building databases. That takes a lot of time and a lot of police resource that's very hard to quantify, or at least they say it's very hard to quantify to us when we do freedom of information requests. And then it's the deployments of police resourcing when they're using these cameras. They want police officers on corners ready to stop and talk to people and all the rest of it. So it is a quite significant expenditure. What they get in return, it's hard to quantify, it's hard to say. Certainly they can trot out arrest statistics, but as anyone kind of who's keeping an eye on policing in the UK knows, arrests don't mean prosecutions. So somebody might be stopped and spoken to and then let to go on their way, or they could be, taken into custody but then let go. People are bouncing around the criminal justice system.
Sorry, when you say arrest statistics, so is that how they're trying to show that it's been a successful program by showing their arrest statistics?
Yeah, now they're doing that because they're arresting more people using facial recognition. But they also
presumably you said they also.
Well, there were lots of the misidentifications as well. So where people are wrongly stopped. And in fact, this is happening less because the algorithms are getting more accurate. That is 100% the case. And I can see
the algorithms are getting
more accurate now. So we used to see tons of misidentifications. I think the first time it was used at Notting Hill Carnival, 99% of the flags were misidentifications.
What year was that?
That was 2016, I think, or 2015. And I monitored the police using facial recognition at Carnival like 2 years in a row, and it was really, really bad. So it would flag like a woman as a wanted man and things like that, like people that looked completely and totally different. And the police have persisted and really trained algorithms on the general public over time to the point where it is quite accurate now, but there are still misidentifications. In fact, I'm going to be in court in January because I'm bringing a legal challenge against the Metropolitan Police alongside a man called Sean Thompson, who I witnessed being misidentified by the police as a result of a live facial recognition check. And he was treated really badly. He was held for about half an hour, asked to produce his ID. We're not a papers carrying country, or at least we weren't, so we didn't have any ID on him, but he was very compliant and very calm, and he got his wife to send him a picture of his passport. That wasn't good enough for the police. He got her to send another one. So at this point, he's showing them like 2 or 3 photos of his passport. They're questioning him. Is that really you? Is that really your passport? They were desperate to try and find some reason to have stopped him. And I see this happen with police stops all the time, even stop and search as well. And if it's clearly not someone that they need to speak to, that they'll try to find some reason to justify the stop. He then was treated really like an animal, like an exhibit. They were trying to put lights on him and say, let's have a look at your scars, any tattoos, to try and identify him. And
this wasn't at Carnival, was it?
No, this was near London Bridge.
Okay.
And then eventually he was let to go on his way. But that's the kind of very dystopian scenario we're going to see much more of, because if you have, even with a camera that's 99% accurate, if you're scanning millions of members of the public, that error rate, although it's a small percentage, is still a lot of people.
But sorry, you said that it was 99% inaccurate
when it was first used. That's right.
Used.
Yeah.
And they're not prepared to tell us how much they're spending on it, but they are showing us the data on how many arrests are being made, it doesn't seem like that's enough information to judge this is a good program. So I don't quite understand how it's being pushed through and who's exactly pioneering this if it's not clear to the public that it's a successful program.
Well, I think also what the public needs to consider, even if there are more arrests being made using live facial recognition, is that the best way to do policing? Do we basically want to live in a kind of open prison and have cameras used to do the work that police officers used to do, to a point where we kind of know that criminals are swilling around and we just hope that they walk past one of these cameras? A question that I've asked the police is, what else have you done? If there are people that you are trying to seek to arrest, are you only putting them on the watch list if you've already been to their address, if you've already tried to find them and identify them? No, they're not. That's not the case. So you don't have to, if somebody reports a crime and you have a suspect, they don't have to have tried to find that suspect at all before they put them onto a facial recognition watch list and kind of just hope that they walk into the arms of police officers. And then there's the cost to the general public. There's the cost to the rest of us. Do we want to live in a kind of total policing environment like that, where we're constantly being scanned and watched by the police, and that we're all treated like we're in effectively like a custody lineup?
Yes.
I don't think so.
Well, actually, I don't want to get too philosophical. I was going to sort of talk about this at the end because there's some other things I want to talk about. But I actually wonder that there is a decent proportion of the British public that do want that world, and I see this as kind of like an ancient the battle for this, or maybe it's the contention of the British spirit between those who want liberty in the kind of tradition of John Locke and those who want freedom from, let's say, poverty or freedom from unemployment. This is famously Sir William Beveridge posited this during the Second World War, and it was the philosophy behind the welfare state. But actually, there's a part of the British spirit that wants freedom from the difficult things in life, and there's another part. We are the country that invented liberty, after all. And Americans like to say it was them, but I would argue it was us. And I think that there is that contention within the British spirit, and that's maybe why we're having this argument. Maybe it's why our country has been slightly later than these other countries to pull these things through, because of that tradition of liberty.
Completely. And I think there's a very beautiful thing there about our country, and actually about the backlash that Starmer has faced over the past week or so, where he has actually, in his misguided attempt to appeal to patriotism, he has actually ignited national pride, but just in the complete opposite way that he thought he would, because actually everyone's been united in opposition to the idea of the Brit card. And the reason is this: what's very different to Britain compared to the rest of Europe is that we have a common law system and we have common law freedoms. We have the idea and the dream of the freeborn Englishman, the idea that just by virtue of being on this soil, we have rights and freedoms, and we are free we are left alone by authorities to do what we want to do, unless we incur on another person's freedom, unless we do something wrong. It's still the case. We don't have to identify ourselves to police officers for no reason. We don't have to identify ourselves to anyone. We don't have to answer to anyone unless we have done something wrong. And whether people realise it or not, whether people are always conscious about it every day or not, that is totally, totally core to British culture and to our way of life, that deep-seated love for liberty. The government works for us, not the other way round. And we're not a population that lives on licence. We don't do permits. We don't carry papers. It's different to the rest of Europe, and other countries that have more top-down legal systems, where you can do things because the law permits you to do them. We go the other way around. We can do it because there's nothing to stop us from.
Yes,
from
they have their Roman
it.
law tradition, which and the Napoleonic system is similar. That it's very much top down.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why the notion of us having a mandatory digital ID actually speaks completely to the heart of British civil liberties, because it means that then we become a papers carrying country, that the government basically puts us on licence and starts to give and take permissions about what we do and make us answerable to authorities in a way that we're not currently. And that's why this whole notion of Brit card is for the birds. It's wholly and completely un-British.
Let's just touch on the popularity, which you mentioned there in passing. So the Labour Together report on the brick card proposal, actually, I think I have it here, it shows not just amongst Labour but amongst Conservative Party that there is huge support for a brick card, for an ID card being used if it is to check whether someone has the right to work in the UK. Even amongst the Conservative parties, there's 89% support. And it's a pretty similar thing with regards to landlords checking the right to rent in the UK. Now, I've seen other reports that this has flipped since Keir Starmer's announcement, in that people, now that they're looking into it, actually don't agree with the idea of digital ID. But what's your take on it? Is it popular or is it unpopular?
Completely unpopular. And we have to see those polls by Labour Together and the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change, both of which are connected to big tech funding. We have to take those with a pinch of salt and look very carefully at the way that the questions have been phrased, that the public have answered. Because what we see in other polls is that, generally, and over the past, 20 years, I suppose, the polls have the British public has generally been fairly split down the middle, pro and against a national identity system. So when I see polls that say overwhelmingly the public is in favour of a digital ID, I normally look at the wording and find that it's not quite as simple as it looks. And the big mistake that Starmer has made and that his government have made is that clearly they've drunk the Kool-Aid from these think tanks who have come in as good lobbyists with the funding that they have and said, guess what? The polls are really in favour of a digital ID. You should introduce one. It's going to go down brilliantly. And of course, that's not the case. And I think he should have looked at those polls a bit more critically, because it's massively, massively backfired. But also, if the public were so overwhelmingly in favour of a national ID, if it's so good, you wouldn't have to make it mandatory, would you? There's something quite telling in the fact that we're going to be legally forced to have one, that shows, I think we all know that this is something that's very unpopular with the public. The polls have now flipped. Since Starmer introduced this, the majority of the public are against a digital ID.
Again, not to sort of go around this, but I do think that so many of us have opted into these other forms of digital ID that aren't linked to the government. That contention remains, but it's interesting that it's an interesting critique there. Let's talk about the funding, and we've mentioned Tony Blair a couple of times. Of course, when he was Prime Minister, as we've talked about, he tried to bring this in, but it seems that it's the Tony Blair Institute that are behind Starmer, certainly ideologically. And behind the Tony Blair Institute are various lobbyists, but there is Larry Ellison and Oracle, who have tried. I think they've given in the sum something like $130 million to date to the Tony Blair Institute, and we've pledged another $250 million, something like that, in further funding. Oracle, who actually have the I don't fully understand exactly what they do, but they are in the business of building these the software needed for to implement such a digital ID. So, what light can you shine on the machinations of the Tony Blair Institute and Oracle?
Well, very little, because there's a great deal of opacity, I think, around actually the Tony Blair Institute's funding just generally. And that's starting to unravel now, because now we're starting to see reporting about the enormous big tech funding that does go into the Institute. But it certainly is very close to the government. It's very close to Starmer, the Tony Blair Institute. And you can see the fingerprints of Tony Blair all over this proposal for a mass digital ID. And of course, there are companies that would stand to gain from, millions and millions and millions of pounds by making this mandatory for the entire public. It would be naive not to question the financial interests that would be involved in a system like this. At the same time, certainly from my perspective, I'm not too focused on that, because I think that whatever the financial interests are, as there will always be with a scheme like this, I think we just can win the arguments. I just think the arguments against digital ID, any potential hint of corruption or financial interest aside, the arguments against it are completely strong enough that we can win this fight on those grounds alone.
Fair enough, but it's also worth mentioning that there have been accusations that Tony Blair's son, Ewan Blair, is set to profit from this because his company, which are called, I think it's Metaverse. It can't be called Metaverse, Multiverse.
Mm-hmm.
But I actually couldn't find verification of this.
No.
I couldn't. Some people have accused him of this possible corruption online. I actually couldn't verify this, and I wondered if you had anything.
No. I think this is such an early stage. There is no one is contracted. There are no tenders. Nothing that we know of in terms of the confirmed financial interests right now, which also tells you something about the seriousness of this as a policy proposal. This has been done in quite a reactionary slapdash way. No one in government really knows what the substance is, how the difficult questions are going to be answered about how this will work in practice. It's being managed by the Department for Science and Technology rather than the Home Office, which makes very little sense. Although it must be said that some of the officials that will then be working on it in DCIT are people that have previously been at the Tony Blair Institute, also people that were involved with the Online Safety Act. I mean, that's something we haven't spoken about, but I think is a real concern, that we'll also need digital IDs to go online and to open social media accounts.
Was that proposed in the Online Safety Act? I did read the Act. I don't remember that.
Well, the Online Safety Act requires age checks. And so since its implementation, more and more ID is required online. And there have been lots of questions and hand-wringing about what kind of ID will people be able to use, what's a safe way of doing this, and so I think there's a very, very significant chance that if we do end up with mandatory digital IDs, the question will be, well, why aren't we using them to make sure we know who's behind that Twitter account, that X account, that Facebook account, and so on.
Seeing as we haven't spoken since the Online Safety Act, I know we did discuss this in a previous podcast in many lifetimes ago, but I wondered what you thought of the final act as it was published, and what your biggest concerns about it are.
I mean, I think everyone's seen that the implementation of the Online Safety Act has been a nightmare over the past few months, in that you've got companies that are moving out of the UK that have had to change their services for people accessing them in the UK because of these onerous age ID requirements, content that has been censored.
What kind of companies left?
I can't reel off examples now, but we have on Big Brother Watch, we've been collecting examples of the types of content that has been restricted. It's like North Korea style, like you can't access this here because of your legal system, because of the Online Safety Act and because of age gating. And so kind of all of the warnings that we gave about the Online Safety Act, when people were treating us as though those warnings were hyperbolic, I'm afraid have proven to be true, that people are being locked out of content and there has been more censorship as a result. And this is just the beginning. Yeah. People are getting around some of these ID checks through things like VPNs, but I think if you had a digital ID, it will become inevitable that everyone will just be expected to use this one identifier in order to open social media accounts and to sort of navigate online.
One of my biggest concerns about the Online Safety Act was the desire to set up a new countering disinformation unit. You actually exposed the counter disinformation unit back in 2022, I believe, with regards to COVID. This shows a sort of the desire to carry on as that they have learned nothing, and given the various occasions and quite regular occasions that the government have used to act in a totalitarian way, an authoritarian way, I should say, rather, with regards to disinformation, misinformation, tying that to digital ID seems like won't be very long before this becomes a free speech thing, as you've already argued.
Yeah, I think so, and that will be through probably the war on anonymity online. That anonymity is being treated as though it's a big risk, as free speech has been treated as though it's some kind of like underground, edgy and dangerous principle as well. The idea of anonymity has been attacked in the same way, and actually, anonymity is really important. It's important for whistleblowers. It's important for just ordinary members of the public, especially in the very kind of censorial climate in which we live, for people to be able to say what they really think. And sometimes they do that from anonymous accounts. I think that's very important. It also has led to big movements like the Me Too movement and others that I think are important. It's important that people feel that they can speak freely, and anonymity is one of the key tools for them to be able to do that. What we'll see once we have this mandatory digital ID, before we beat it, because I think we will, is that every moral panic will be responded to with something along some kind of extension of the digital ID. So, every few months there's a story about something really bad that's happened with social media, or with children accessing the internet, or children being able to buy things online that they shouldn't be able to do. And every single time we have one of these cases, the question will be, why aren't we using the digital ID on the internet to stop that from happening, or to control that, or to monitor that? And it will become then something that also impacts how freely people can speak.
It'll make more efficient the system that already has 30 people a day being arrested for social media posts.
Absolutely could. Yeah, we're in a real moment of peril for free speech in this country, and a time of identity politics. And is it not a very good idea to introduce identity cards in that scenario?
Quite. So we've covered a lot of ground. Before we take things over to the Substack to answer some of our Substackers' questions, which will no doubt be even more thorough than mine, is there anything else that you think we need to tie the bow on this issue? Maybe
it's some of ministers' own words, because some people watching this might think, that if you buy what the government has said at face value, it's just going to be used for right to work checks, right? It's only got this one single use. So you've speculated about if it were to be used in this and that way and for other reasons. There was, and I think it's important to use the government's kind of own words in describing then what really is going to happen. There was a junior minister who was on TV shortly after this announcement was made, who said the first use case for it is around the right to work checks by the end of this parliament. It's a big change, he said. So we're not saying we're going to boil the ocean in one go, because the public would really be sceptical of that. We're saying we're starting with this issue of right to work check first, but there are loads of other applications for digital ID. I think that's the quiet bit out loud. That's saying, we
boil
can
the
see,
ocean.
boil the
what
ocean.
What kind of phrase to throw in there?
So it is like literally the kind of boiling frog scenario. Like, if we do this gently enough, you won't realise the extent to which this is going. Then you've got the government's explainer page, which doesn't just talk about right to work. It talks about applying for government and private sector services using the digital ID scheme, renters, welfare, childcare. You have to store this on your phone. What about those of us who don't want to have a smartphone or don't have one? That will be used to prove your identity when voting in elections, opening a bank account, proving your age. So all the things that we've spoken about. Sharing data with third parties, there's a section on that where it's permitted under the UK law. That can happen too. In the letter that was sent, the government letter that was sent round to parliamentarians, a copy of that was shared with me, and that again talks about that this is a significant cross-government programme, and it will be used for cases from applying for benefits online to proving your age, opening bank accounts, and they're even going to consult on whether digital ID should be issued to children from 13 years old. If you were watching Keir Starmer give this announcement and say that it was just to stop their boats, whatever other nonsense phrase that he used, you would not have any idea that any of that was actually underneath the plans. But I do think that there are enough people in the British public who realise that he's treated them like idiots, who have said, no, thank you very much. We're not buying it. We don't believe you. We don't trust you. And we're never going to have a digital ID.
On that, then, my last question will be, how exactly is this defeated?
Yeah.
Tony Blair obviously was defeated. This hasn't passed. It's got to still pass through the Commons and the Lords. What can the people who oppose this do, the British citizens do, who want to stop this coming about?
Well, obviously, I'm going to say, please, please, please follow Big Brother Watch, sign up for our updates and so on, because we're going to be running a national campaign against this. So things like targeting certain MPs it might be your MP who is someone who's on the fence, who we might be able to win round. We will be putting up a massive campaign on this. We will try our hardest to create a situation where this doesn't get through the Commons, where it doesn't pass into law. But it is going to be really tough because, of course, Starmer's got an absolutely massive majority. So even though the public hate this, in fact, even Palantir, someone from Palantir has come out and said, no, we wouldn't touch this. It's so unpopular. Even we wouldn't want this contract. This is seriously, seriously bombed as a policy, but he's got the numbers to push it through Parliament. So we're going to put up the fight of our lives in Parliament. We need the public, we need everyone who cares about this to come on board and take action at the right moments in order to try and stop it getting through Parliament. But even if it does get into law, as with the Blair ID card scheme, there are more things that we can do. We won't give up the fight and we'll try to get it repealed. Every other party in Parliament, every single other one is against this. So we're on a really good starting basis. And then the other thing is that those of us who are just going to not comply will have to stick together and find sensible ways around that. And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. I said this with COVID passes, and it was critical to how we defeated COVID passes in the end. That for those of us who don't want to live in a country where we're governed by digital IDs and we have to show our pass, in order to just live our lives every day, we will just have to say no. And non-compliance is going to be critical to defeating this in the long run as well.
Well, on that note of optimism, let's move over to the Substack. Silkie Carlo, thank you. Congratulations on the phenomenal work that Big Brother Watch are doing. You've already mentioned them. I presume people should go to the website.
Yeah.
Is there anything else you'd like to bring attention to about your work?
No to digitalid.co.uk. That's where to go to join this campaign.
Fantastic. Silkie Carlo, a great pleasure.
Thank you.
Tom Bolt asks, it would be great to get a snapshot of what information the government might have on any quote-unquote Joe blogs at any one time. I suppose he means what information they have on us.
Oh my gosh, where do you start? So the intelligence agencies were seeking to build a web browsing profile for every single visible internet user in the world. There is mass interception affecting text messages, phone calls, internet use. If you became a person of interest to the authorities, then it would be hard to imagine what information they can't get. Can I throw a question back to you? Because that first question is really interesting about people leaving.
If the best people leave the country, there's no chance of this country being saved. And I would rather go down with the ship. Thank you for watching the Winston Marshall Show with Silkie Carlo. Head over to winstonmarshall.co.uk now for an extended conversation between me and Silkie, where she takes some of our Substack subscribers' own questions, and we have an extended conversation about the future of Britain, why it is that we stay and fight for our country, and why not leave? That's all at winstonmarshall.co.uk. But until next time, thanks for watching and be well.